Hi, my name is George Liu. Welcome to the first ever episode of AFDI and GDLN's The Talk. Today, we have something special for you. But first, I would like to thank all the audiences who joining us today. I know there's a time difference, so I appreciate a lot that if you're at nighttime or if you're at midnight, thank you very much. Also, I would like to thank all the organizations, all the international organizations who help us in participating in this episode. So everyone, please remember, you can post all your queries regarding this topic through our live stream broadcasting platform. All your questions will be collected and answered. Today, we are going to talk about Special Economic Zone, or as many may call it, SEZ. Now, in nowadays, when we look at developing countries' economic policies, there's always special economic zones embedded into their economic policy. But many are wondering why? Why would a developing country adore a special economic zone? So today, we have invited Professor Aradhna Aggarwal, who is from the Copenhagen Business School, and she has been researching this topic for over 4 decades. And she also is an expert in many prestigious international organizations. So we are very honored to have her here today to talk about special economic zone. So let's have a look at the most fundamental questions. What is special economic zones? Here you go, Professor. We are very fortunate today to invite Professor Aradhna Aggarwal to join the talk. She is the chair professor from the Copenhagen Business School, and she is also the leading researcher and scholar in the field of special economic zone. We are very lucky that she is delivering a lecture in Shanghai for AFDI and Asia Development Bank's Special Economic Zone Joint Training Program. So we have this great opportunity to have Professor Aggarwal to be here with us to share her knowledge on special economic zone. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Aradhna Aggarwal. Good morning, Professor. How are you?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
I hope you had a great flight from Denmark to Shanghai.
Well, yes, it was a long flight, but very comfortable.
Excellent. So I know that currently a lot of countries that they love to use special economic zone as part of their economic scheme to further develop their economy, especially for developing countries. But what is special economic zone? Can you give us some ideas about it and how it started?
Well, this term special economic zones is very ambiguous. First of all, we must understand. Yeah. It is used in different ways in different countries. Even the kind of name that are given to special economic zones in different countries are different. So, but there are some core characteristics of an economic space to be called special economic zones. And these core characteristics are that these are normally geographically delineated areas.
Yeah.
They are fenced in many cases, in fact in most cases. Then they are essentially targeting export-oriented units.
Yeah.
And then they provide custom facilities. So there is trade facilitation. But I would say the most important characteristic of these spaces is that the normal rules and regulations that are applicable to domestic economies, they are not really applicable, or they are applicable in a relaxed form in special economic zones. So their legal regime, their regulatory regime, their custom regime, trade regime, these are very different in special economic zones, and I think that is the essence of special economic zones.
So I've read some research about special economic zone. A lot of the scholars, they believe the ever first SEZ, which is special economic zone, is from Ireland, Shannon. Is that true?
Well, actually, Shannon is the first one which is known to the world. But I would say that there is a long history of special economic zones, and it can be dated back to the 12th century Europe, when for the first time free trade cities or free trade ports emerged there. This was a time when there was feudalism in Europe, and feudals were surviving on tariff rates, on trade that was passing through their territories. But this was increasing the cost of trade, and the business lobbies, which were very strong, they were very unhappy. So particularly in the Baltic Sea, and these were the German traders who got together, formed Hansas, and these Hansas pressurized these feudals to allow them to go for free trade. Because their argument was that this would generate more economic prosperity. That was the main source of economic income those days. So some of these feudals actually agreed, and this is how Hanseatic cities came into being. So I'm talking about 12th century Europe. So of course there are other examples, which date back even earlier, but this is the kind of modern times when we find that there were traces of, or the emergence of free trade zones, which became a part of special economic zones eventually. And then these free trade ports and free cities, they flourished during mercantilism in Europe. And this was because this was a time when tariff rates were very high. These regimes were highly restricted, but then the main source of income was transshipment trade, and therefore the governments agreed to have free ports and free cities. Well, after the capitalism started, nation states were being formed, and finance departments became very strong. And then they didn't like to have free ports and free cities because it meant a lot of loss of revenue. And then these free ports and free cities, they were converted into smaller areas within those ports and within those cities, and they came to be known as free trade zones. So it was in around the 16th and 17th century that we see that these free trade zones started emerging, and they flourished in those countries, and then they were brought to developing countries through colonialism. So when they came and formed their colonies in developing countries, they set up these free ports and free cities here, and this is how this concept was brought to developing countries. But until the 1950s, I would say, most of these zones were concentrated only in the developed world. So we normally forget that developed world actually took a lot of advantage of this instrument, of this innovation, I would say. For instance, the US started these zones in 1930, and you won't believe that they gave lots of concessions to these free trade zones to promote economic activity, and to some extent they also allowed manufacturing beyond what actually is allowed in these SEZs. So manufacturing to the extent that the code of these commodities could be changed. So this is how they try to promote economic activity. But then in the 1940s, there was an agrarian crisis in Puerto Rico. And because of that agrarian crisis, the economy was in shambles, and they approached the USA for help. And then there was this consultancy firm, American consultancy firm, that helped them. They proposed to diversify their economy. So the industrial diversification was the kind of recipe to get out of that crisis. And then Operation Blue Strap started in the country. And under that, their objective was to diversify the industrial sector, but there was hardly any industrial sector in the country. So they devised this new plan in which a part of the operations of foreign American companies would be transferred to Puerto Rico. And these operations were essentially of labor-intensive nature. And the and then these could be transported back to America. So this is how they formed first global value chains.
So they will be said as a first stage.
That was the first stage when this happened.
Labor intensity.
But then Puerto Rico didn't become known because there was no specific delineated area from where these activities were operated. The entire island was a sort of a zone, which was not really recognized at that time.
So, Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
Ah.
But then in Shannon in 1958,
It's a different thing.
yeah, it was a different thing. It was not about global value chains. It was like many long distance flights, they used to stop at Shannon for fueling. But and therefore this Shannon airport was doing very well.
Yeah.
But then there was a new discovery, and it became possible for the planes to take long flights without really refueling themselves. So Shannon started losing relevance and economic activity.
Yeah.
So Ireland then hit upon this idea of having a small industrial estate close to the airport where light manufacturing products were manufactured, and they were then traded through the air. So this is how this industrial estate came to be known as the first EPZ, export processing zone, because lots of incentives were also given for companies to come and set up their shops there.
Yes.
And this is how the knowledge of special economic zones, or EPZs, so-called EPZs, that spread.
So thank you, Professor. So now, very insightful information. So we now know that special economic zone has come from a very long way from the feudal age for the purpose of free trade to the modern age to integrate the global value chain. But through time, there are many different types of special economic zones have emerged. So, Professor, what other type of special economic zone can you explain? So I understand that over time there are different stages of special economic zone or export process zone. So through time, through the evolution of SEZ, then will there be many different types of special economic zones?
Well, yes, exactly. This is because with the evolution of global value chains, this special economic zones also evolved, because special economic zones, we must understand, are nothing but vehicles of GVCs, global value chains. So with different variety of activities being relocated to different countries, different types of special economic zones emerged. Their purpose changed, their objectives changed, their location changed, and the services, the packages, incentives, their design, everything changed over the years. So as I said, that we started with free trade zones, but then EPZs came, export processing zones. But then when China came, then they started special economic zones of very comprehensive variety, which were open, which were very large, which were actually which involved or consisted of all kinds of economic activities, and this became a kind of trend. But then this was not the end, because then several other types like sector specific zones came, financial services, then pharmaceutical zones, for instance.
Pharmaceutical has its own zone as well.
Yes, pharmaceutical zones, and biotechnology zones, and automobile zones. So there are different sector specific zones which have come up. But then the most important development in special economic zones happened in Asia, I would say, when international zones started coming up. So zones in the first stage, they were set up in border areas, which was not new, because maquiladoras were also set up in that, but the purpose was very different now. The purpose was to exploit the comparative advantage in the neighboring areas without really having that immigration thing in mind.
You work for us, but you're not going to live here.
So yes. So then, but then cross-border economic zones started coming up, and the geographical areas in two different countries, they were merged into one zone, and the purpose was to really take advantage of the two sides of resources. And in addition to that, growth triangles came, then growth areas came. So Bimpiaga, for instance, is a growth area. So these kinds of new innovations, which are international innovations, the purpose is not only to promote economies of those areas, but also to have integration, regional integration. So I think that there is a marked evolution in this concept of special economic zones.
So thank you very much, Professor. Talk about the types of special economic zone. from that, we understand that the special economic zone will evolve when the global value chain evolve as well. So through time, not only that each different special economic zone have emerged, but also the objectives, the purpose, even the incentive packages, and also the policies may change as well. So in that case, why should developing countries adopt a special economic zone? Professor, can you explain that? So yes, it seems like, as you mentioned, Asian countries, I believe majority of Asian countries are developing countries. They are always want to take part of to set up a special economic zone. But why should they start an economic zone? It seems like they are using it as a one-fit-all solution to boost up the economy.
Well, actually, that's very true. And I think it is very important to understand why special economic zones, the question that you are asking. I think the policy makers must ask that question. Why they should have a special economic zone in the first place. Because normally after the success of China, they were demonstrated as the most potent tool of attracting economic activity, FDI and things like that. But they may not be successful in all the countries. So why SEZs? First of all, we must understand that. You see that, as I said, global value chains are proliferating across the world, and everybody is trying to participate in those global value chains. This is because this is one way to attract foreign direct investment and technology. So attracting FDI and technology, these are the two key factors that are leading these economies to push into special economic zones. But then why special economic zones? The reason is that business climate in most of these countries are rather bad. It's rather poor because there are some institutional barriers here, and there are some bottlenecks, production failures. Markets are not really working because of so many factors. The labor market is not working. Financial markets are not really working in the market way. So there are certain policy tools which are in place that do not allow efficiencies of the markets. Or there are restrictive regimes on trade or FDI, for instance. Now, it is very important to overcome these rules and regulations, these regimes, to attract FDI. So, special economic zones is one reason where you can relax these rules and you can allow these foreign investors to come and produce for value chains. You see, for value chains, you have to have very cost effective. You have to have very effective infrastructure so that schedules are met. So this time is a very important factor. So there is time, efficiency and cost. These are the important things. And I think the purpose of setting special economic zones is to relax the rules, provide good enabling business environment where they can attract foreign direct investment and participate in global value chains. But then what is happening currently is that new special economic zones are being set up in newer countries. But then many of these bottlenecks, many of these failures, they are not really addressed. They have become a sort of incentives platforms. So they are providing lots of tax incentives to foreign companies. And this is creating a problem of race to the bottom. So I think what is very important is to really understand what are the development challenges, what are the institutions that act as bottlenecks for their investment and their technology transfers, and then address those ones in special economic zones. So it is very important that every special economic zone is designed on the basis of the country-specific factors. So there is no one-size-fits-all kind of formula, and there is no recipe why a special economic and how a special economic can be successful, except that they should effectively address the problems that the country is facing in attracting FDI.
Right, thank you, Professor. So now we know why developing countries want to adopt special economic zone. Now, from Professor's information, there are two reasons One is to attract foreign direct investment or FDI. The second is the technology. Now, in order to attract the foreign direct investment, developing countries really need to soften or relax the rules and regulations inside the zone, so then the foreign investors will feel comfortable in bringing their resources to the developing country. And also in that, will also bring technology into the developing country as well. Now, the second thing is, in order to foreign direct investment, a lot of developing countries think they can just copy and paste the successful example, so then the developing country itself will also be successful in the special economic zone. But as Professor explained, not a great idea, because each developing nation's culture, experience, situation, and condition are all different. So it is a big no-no to have to copy and paste the exact special economic zone from others and hoping that you'll become successful. So wow, I can actually see there's a lot of questions coming in. Thank you very much. Keep posting your queries. So now let's move on. So Professor, can you tell us what are the factors of a successful special economic zone? Yeah, because I understand, as you mentioned as well, because China has a huge success on the special economic zone to boost up its economy. A lot of Asian countries, developing countries, which I'm not going to name, they're trying to copy and paste straight away. But isn't to have one of the factors to have a successful special economic zone is its infrastructure. As of course you mentioned it as well. I've seen some research mentioned, again, I'm not going to mention which country. They set up a special economic zone, but the rules are still quite similar to the domestic rules. And also the road, the railway, the port, poorly built, not really suitable to handle a large number of foreign companies. So say if this happens, how should they, improve?
First and the most important tool is tax incentives themselves. Secondly, you can design SEZs according to the requirements of the new industries that you really want to attract. So you can have sector-specific SEZs, for instance, and then you can provide all the facilities to promote those new industries, because new industries require new setup, new technologies, new instruments to promote. So there you can actually test and see how you can do that.
So we understand that not all the SEZ is a successful one. So is there any key factors that the government really need to tune on and install in their SEZ scheme in order to have a successful one?
Look, there are two different things here. One is the overall SEZ scheme, and the other one is the success of a particular zone. Now, if I start with success of a particular zone, then there are 4 layers of factors. They are international, national, then there are meso factors and micro factor. So international means that there has to be demand, because these are export oriented. So if the world is in recession, then it's very difficult to make your special economic. So first is that. Secondly, your national policies should make sure that the economy has export competitiveness. If there is inflation in the economy, if the cost of production is very high in the economy, for any reason, if the cost of trading is high in the economy, then exports cannot happen. So second, the third is the regional factors, which we just talked about, that there should be proper connectivity outside of SEZs. Also, the environment should change, and that should be aligned to what it is in SEZs, and supporting industries should be there. And then you have microclimate. Microclimate is about the facilitation that you are offering to businesses within the SEZs. So all these factors together determine whether you can be a successful SEZ or not. Just one factor I would like to also mention, that this SEZ should be, it should actually be based on the comparative advantage of the region.
Yeah.
So that's a very important factor here. So, but if you take the kind of broader regime, I think that there are three pillars of the success. First, you have to strategize your overall SEZ policy and align that with the domestic development policy.
Yeah.
So whatever is the strategy you are following for industrialization in developing economies, you should know how to place special economic zones within that strategy. This is the first major point that one must notice. The second one is that there should be an implementation strategy, how to implement your special economic zones successfully. So then you have to take into account several factors, like whether the people who are, whether the stakeholders where this special economic zones are located, they are in favor of special economic zones or not. So stakeholder management is important. Then human resource management is important. The people who are implementing this program, are they really capable of doing that? So they need to have some sort of training. They should have some sort of incentives, some accountability. So these are the important things. Then macroeconomic management is important. Then you have to have international initiatives like international agreements that you can go for. So there is a whole gamut of factors. So many factors. And then finally you always have to see when to transition. Your earlier question I would come to. So there should be a continuous upgrading of special economic zones if you want to keep them alive and successful. So this is not merely creating a piece of land as infrastructure, but strategizing that within the kind of broader development goals and strategies.
I think it's quite a pity for some countries who really have a good and successful special economic zone, but then they stay there forever and they just continue the same way over and over for the past 20, 30 years, and they're not improving anything. Do you have any suggestion for them?
Yeah, my suggestion is that close them up.
Close them up? Really?
Yes, and instead try industrial estates, ordinary industrial estates, because it is important not to put a lot of money in those propositions, because if lots of financial resources are transferred to these zones without any success, as we have seen, or the revenue is lost without any success, then the other sectors of the economy, they are affected adversely. So we actually should develop more of open industrial estates with facilitation. So instead of really facilitating these smaller spaces, we facilitate some larger spaces with also the domestic companies there. So if you are not successful, then try to really see that your resources are more efficiently allocated and used.
Now, I understand that one of the special economic zone structure is cross-border, meaning two nations collaborate each other rather than compete, but cooperate. That's one good way to look at it. But what if the two countries are very close to each other, they have its own special economic zone very close to each other, and they are trying to compete with each other? How are you going to deal with that?
Actually, that's what is very important to understand, that special economic zones are like, two-way sword. So on the one hand, you try to have regional cooperation through cross-border zones, but at the same time, all these countries have their national zones where they are competing for FDI. And for that, they are actually they are involved in a race to bottom. So then in that case, it is very difficult to really use, and this is the reason why many cross-border zones are not successful, because every country wants to protect its own regime. And then they want to really attract a lot of FDI in their national SEZs. So it takes a lot to really promote these cross-border zones or even growth areas.
Now, there's the key factors for the success of SEZ, which you mentioned about, more looking at the national or as one country zone. Now, if you have a cross-border special economic zone, what factors will two or more countries need to think about before they start that, and how it can be successful?
That's a very interesting and very important question actually, because the same factors are not really applicable here. This is because this is about regional special economic zone. This is not about national zone. And for that, I think the most important factor is that the two regional governments where the SEZs is set up, those governments should come together, and there should be, in many cases, let me just give you some examples. For instance, like you see, there are very different patterns in the world for this kind of development, and this development is not peculiar to Asia. First of all, we must understand. Now, if we start with the US, then US, we know that is a market-based economy where the government is not really getting into micromanagement issues. So America and Canadian cross-border zones, even if they are not delineated areas, the areas on borders, they actually have developed using this bottom-up approach. This is because these were the local governments there that made efforts to come together and facilitate the movement of people and economic activity. So these were the local government's initiative and local people's initiative that developed those areas. Now, if you look at Europe, they actually had this program of cross-border zones again, because this is a common market, but they wanted to develop cross-border cooperation as well. So there actually they had a particular program initiated under which the governments of those local areas, they were brought together, and they actually promoted a kind of social cohesion. This, I think, was very important. So like there were, in some cases, there was even joint parliament.
Joint parliament?
Yes, in the region, which was taking decision for those particular areas. And then they decided to have schools, common health facilities, so people could move. So this is the way people got together. They could identify themselves as, I mean, this became an identity for them, being in that region. And this was very helpful when they promoted economic activities in that region. So this was a top-down approach.
Of course.
But then the idea through top-down approach was that people get together. The governments, local governments know how to work together and cooperate. Now, if we come to Asia or Africa, there normally these are not the local initiatives. These are the initiatives by the third intergovernmental agencies. So it is like the ADB, which is trying to promote such areas in Asia, and it is African Development Bank, which is trying to do that in Africa. So in that case, I think the primary responsibility, or the first step is to really have that, the regional cooperation, not right away for economic activity, but social integration of governments, of people, and integration of the governments. So there should be some sort of cohesion in the governance, in the rules, because it is very important that there is harmonization of rules. May not be homogenization, but harmonization of the rules should be there in the region. Otherwise, it's very difficult to really get the two regions together if they follow very different rules. So if you create that identity of the region, and if you have some sort of joint councils or governing that or whatever, some joint body which can actually harmonize the rules, because they are special economic zones, and the purpose of special economic zones is to have different rules. So there you are allowed. So just forget about all your country rules, and then just have this kind of regional government where you can actually have common rules, or not even homogenized, but homogenized rule. And I think this will be a very important way, first step to really move into domestic.
It's like an experiment. Like
Yes.
how it works.
Yes, so this is an experiment, and I think this experiment then later on can spread to
Yeah.
other parts of those. So, and that can be very helpful for
yeah.
regional cooperation. So, as of now, I would say that there is a lot of competition.
Yeah.
I come back to your
Yes.
original question.
Yeah.
There is a lot of competition, and special economic zones actually, in that sense, are not very helpful in promoting
Yeah.
regional
Yeah.
cooperation. But if we really try to promote these common
Yeah.
zones and
Yeah.
these growth areas,
Yeah.
and I think that will be very important, a very important step in the direction of promoting regional cooperation. And I would say that ADB is really making a lot of efforts.
Yeah,
Huge
yeah.
efforts are being made to bring and to really develop those joint councils and make them work together. So I really wish that these initiatives are successful.
Thank you, Professor, for providing us with very important information on what factors the developing country need to consider in order to have a successful special economic zone. Now, we can separate Professor's comment into two parts, I believe. One is for the national level, another one is cross-border level. Now, for national level, obviously, the one need to consider the facilitation purpose, services, like facilitating the logistics, facilitating all other services in order to help the foreign investors, make them feel comfortable. And also, the second effect is the linkage between the foreign and the local firms, especially the ones inside the zone. Why do we need to do that? Because in this way, the spillover effect can also help the local companies to grow. Now, these are the examples of the national level of special economic zone. Now, when we talk about the cross-border, it is then quite tricky. Now, obviously, Professor gave some examples. For example, you have bottom-up approach, you have top-down approach, and you have third-party approach who help bring two parties together to negotiate, maybe promote social cohesion, also help to understand each other's culture in order to smooth the process of the cross-border zone and maybe hopefully have a greater result. Now, Professor, since we have a smidge little time left, can you give us probably some idea about the difference between Chinese and Indian special economic zones? Thank you, Professor. Now, for the final question, I understand that India actually has a longer special economic zone history than China. I think India started in 1948, 58?
65.
65, yes. What's the difference between the two? Yeah.
Actually, there is a lot of difference.
That's a tough question.
It's a long question, I would
Yeah.
say, because I'm doing a paper on this along with a Chinese professor here in Fudan University. So actually, the two countries started with very different goals, objectives, vision, and scale. So India started on a very small scale with very narrow vision. And because the vision was very narrow, it was merely to earn foreign exchange to support import substituting industrialization, which was taking place outside the SEZs. These SEZs could not really succeed, because whatever was the kind of regulatory regime outside, the same regime was replicated within SEZs. So there was hardly any facilitation. So SEZs could not really grow the way they should have. China adopted a very different philosophy and very different vision. They actually already had a large manufacturing share when they started in 1979 because of their historical characteristics. But they wanted to modernize. They wanted foreign capital. They wanted foreign technology on a large scale so that it spills over to the domestic mainland. This was not the idea in India. They just wanted foreign exchange from those small areas. But then they have these large, open, comprehensive zones, which were very well connected with the domestic mainland. They were succeeded in attracting a lot of FDI because there was so much of facilitation. And not only that, large markets of China, they were a sort of attraction for foreign companies to come here and explore, and then their own diaspora in Hong Kong that really helped in the initial stages. And then, of course, there was a lot of from the West as FDI from the West as well. So China actually succeeded where India could not succeed that much in the beginning because the vision was not there. But let me just, if you allow, allow me, in 2005 we were actually motivated by this Chinese experiment, and we thought that we should also have large special economic zones, so we created larger ones. And now the idea was not to earn foreign exchange, but to have promotion of economic activity. So that was the whole idea. But then these zones could not really succeed much again. So this was the second time we felt that we could not succeed with this experiment again. This was because some of these ancillary issues like land acquisition and things, they were not really taken care of. So when land was acquired for industrialization, there was a sort of protest.
Yes, I heard that from certain Pradesh there actually,
Yes, and the public opinion was totally against special economic zones, and that actually affected the governments. And government started backtracking. And then eventually it has taken away, and it will be taking away all the incentives from special economic zones. But I would say that despite all that crisis and despite all that disastrous experiment, IT zones, information technology zones, they are still successful because they are small in size. India already had comparative advantage in the IT sector. So they actually, many people don't say that they don't really recognize that as success because they say that IT was already successful. So what is a contribution of special economic zone? This is a kind of normal question that is posed by experts in India. But the fact is that special economic zones allowed those companies to grow large, which was not really possible outside of SEZs because of land constraint and because of many other factors in India labor. Within SEZs, they could grow, they could expand, and I think they generated a lot of additional activity and they sustained their growth over the years. So in that context, in that sense, I would say that they did contribute to the growth of the IT sector despite all that. But the prospects are not that bright because by 2020, all direct incentives would be withdrawn. So there is very little for them to be there. And outside of SEZs, the incentives have been upscaled. So
there's no point staying
there. So there is, exactly. So perhaps we could not really understand. Perhaps we were never committed to SEZs the way China was. So China actually started with that vision, and then it continuously upgraded. Not only its existing zones, but it also added to new varieties of zones. So they experimented with newer ideas and with newer varieties, and I think that was the key. So policy continuity and commitment, will, is very important for this program to succeed.
So thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's all. So thank you for watching. I'm George Liu. Stay smart, stay intelligent. I'll see you next time. Thank you very much, Professor, for providing us such insightful information about Special Economic Zone. Unfortunately, now it's time to end. So before the show, we have collected all your queries through our survey. First of all, thank you very much for participating in the survey. And as I can see, there's quite a lot of questions floating in through to our live stream platform as well. So unfortunately, due to the time constraint, we can't answer all your questions all at once. So what we will do is, we will collect all the information about your queries, the ones that we collected before the show, and also the ones that we collected now. We are going to lead that to the next mini-series. And also on that, we will again ask the professor to come in either physically here or through somewhere around the world that has internet to do a live stream to answer all your questions. So please stay tuned to the next mini-series. Now, before we finish, once again, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Also the ones probably in the midnight now, watching us here in China, Shanghai. So thank you very much. Stay smart, stay intelligent. I'm George Liu. I will see you again. Goodbye.